Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I have a special guest here today with me, Mirkrida, a Dutch Sittan practitioner, and today we're going to be talking about what Sittan is exactly like and differences and commonalities within German folk magic. So, Mirkrida, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. With these introductions, I always kind of forget what I want to say. So I'm Naomi Mirkrida. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm also partly German. That is also an important part of me, of who I am, but also of my practice. I teach in the Sittan tradition. I also have experience with other traditions before that, but I've really come back to my family tradition last year. So yeah, happy to talk about that.
Great. So the first question that I usually ask anyone who comes on my channel is what got you interested in your path and how did you come to the path that you are currently on?
Yeah, I think in my case it's kind of mixed because in one way it has always been part of my life. So have always been stories coming from my family, from my mother's side of the family, who is from Northwest Germany, about what they did, so to say. So that was always present in my life. So there was always some sort of connection, but there was always a form of secrecy around that as well. So if I asked a question about that, about what my great grandfather did, or about rituals they performed and what they were known for in their community, it was like, yeah, well, it was kind of like this and kind of like this, but yeah, please don't get too interested in that. We're not talking about that, and that was quite hard, but growing up, but that always, it always stayed with me, so to say. And I always, as a child as well, I was very sensitive to energies surrounding us, energies in nature specifically. So I always kind of had this awareness of the world being ensoulled, so to say, and that there was more between heaven and earth. So that, it has always been present. And then because of that layer of secrecy, so to say, and being kind of the only living person at that point with these sensitivities and with being so interested in family tradition, because when I was 7, my great grandfather died, and he was basically the last person at that point in family tradition who practiced it. So he died then, so I didn't have a living family member to turn to or anything. So I followed a quite long path growing up, and as a teenager and as a young woman, trying all kinds of things. So trying witchcraft, Wicca at some point, and then at one moment I met my teacher who died this year, Linda Wormhout, and then she taught Seiðr and also a form of Northwest European shamanism. And then things started to click in, and after practicing Seiðr and a mixed form of Northwest European shamanism for about 6 years, then I finally, I finally had enough understanding, so to say, of working with spirit to be able to return actually to my own tradition and also to understand the missing pieces, so to say.
Really interesting. So your teacher was who teach Seiðr, was she Dutch as well, or did she come from Scandinavia?
No, she was Dutch. Yeah, Dutch.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting because as you and I both know, Seiðr is like more the Scandinavian thing. So how did that Scandinavian line of traditional magic make its way to the Netherlands? Do you know more about that?
I do know that, and that's also what Linda, my teacher, always told us, is that when you go back far enough, there is some kind of core there was some kind of core people, or how you want to interpret that, especially on the language front as well. So just Proto-Germanic, for example, and that there are so many similarities there, even though it is quite a different energy in the tradition as well. And if you go to Scandinavia, the energy it's quite different in the land, but that there was so much similarity that it was kind of like an entrance for us in the northwest of Europe to kind of remember our own traditions. And that's kind of how she worked with that, although she was quite focused on really the Scandinavian traditions as well, and Scandinavian lore and names. So for me, it functioned for a couple of years in that way, in by learning that, to actually find back my path to my own tradition and my own ground, my soil, so to say.
Your tradition, which is like the West Germanic equivalent to the Seiðr, the Sittan tradition, I'm curious about that, because before I found your content, I never heard of that particular name, and I knew that, of course, there were some folk magical practices, but I didn't like register it as like the West Germanic equivalent to the North Germanic Seiðr. So I'm curious to know more about the Sittan tradition, like who can practice it, are there special requirements and all that stuff?
Yeah, I get this question more often, like who is this for? Also because it is kind of like, it's a family tradition basically. But the way that I see it, it's kind of also the way that Linda taught me things, but then I think maybe on a deeper level, because it's so personal, that I have developed this foundation within the Sittan tradition, and I want to open that to others. So it's basically open to everyone who says, hey, I'm feeling this in my gut. I'm feeling this in my stomach, something is happening. I can learn something here. And then I say, okay, you are welcome. And so to me, it's very important that it is a very open tradition. And my goal actually always is, with the people who come learn with me, that I give them this foundation that they can work with in the way that works for them, whatever path they're following or going to choose. And I always have a very strong focus on ancestors. So whatever part of the world basically they're coming from, they can come to learn that foundation of Sittan. And then I try to guide them basically, or coach them maybe, to get back into that connection with their own ancestral lines, and to find the missing pieces there and the information there. So that's kind of like a way of oral learning. It's also called spirit thought, that in a very structured way, you learn how to ask questions to your ancestors, how to interpret these questions, so that you can find your own tradition actually, or your own path. Or sometimes it's not a whole tradition, but for example, one of the students who has been studying with me the longest now, he suddenly he was struggling with that, because he thought for a long time, he came from a Christian family, that he didn't have any traditions like that in his line. And then at one point he was really open and really, really relaxed. And then a great grandfather came to him and showed him in a trance that there used to be a healing tradition in his family line, and that was it. So no very intricate way of doing things, but just a very down-to-earth, focused way of healing others. And then he was like, okay, what do I need to do with this? Can you help me with interpreting this? So we looked at that together. And now he's actually implemented that in his own practice as energy healer. So that's kind of how we try to do things with Sittan.
I never really had like a distinct family tradition like that student of you that you described. We probably had something way in the past, but
Probably, yes.
I think that's a very common thing. But Oh, my family definitely had like spiritual experiences, and I'm not talking like spiritual experiences in the way a pen moved around the table on its own, but like spiritual experiences in the way that like balls to the walls, batshit crazy kind of spiritual experience that you wouldn't believe really. And
Yeah.
they just don't really pay notice to that, and they kind of ignore it, and they um, just think to themselves, oh yeah, this is a weird thing that happened anyway. And I think
Yeah.
that's the case with many people. So we might not really all know that we do really have some form of spirituality within our family line. And the focus on ancestor work and Sittan is also really interesting to me because, of course, from my perspective, that's also a really big part of Northwestern German folk magic that I
Yeah.
practice. I also wanted to ask you about when you post online, I often see you using like a staff for your
Yes.
practice.
Well, yeah, I have it here.
Oh, cool. That's not something that I like recognize from my practice. I know that in southwestern German folk magic, staffs are commonly used for multi-purpose, but in our area where I live, we do use staffs, but typically they are made and only used for one specific spell, and then it's like done. So a staff being used for multiple things over a long duration of time is something that I don't really know much about, and I'm curious to learn more about that.
Okay, so about the staffs, this one was made actually by my great grandfather and possibly even by his father, but I'm not exactly sure. This is the one I work with the most, and I have inherited over the years several of them, which he made. So that's kind of, it's always important for me to mention because that gives a really important connection to that family line. Um, but yeah, okay, the staff. Well, in the Sittan tradition, it's actually always made from wood. And there's kind of, I think you know the concept of taboos in folk magic, like some things you cannot possibly do or you can do on a certain day or a certain time. And when you want to find a staff, you can use a staff like me that you have inherited from your line, but of course, many people don't have that. Um, so you go out in nature and you look for a staff with a ritual as well, called the Voorloop. I think we talked about that before, and you knew a similar ritual, but I don't remember the name. Um, but the taboo is that you can't cut a branch from a tree or that you can't hurt a tree in order to obtain a staff. So you have to naturally find it. So that's actually very important about the staff in the first place. It has to come to you, basically, it has to choose you. And the staff, I will take it again. We see the staff as an ensouled object, ensouled being. So also the staff has its own spirit, and it already has its own spirit coming from the tree, basically. But also, again, the ancestors that you work with, so the ancestors from your line. What's important in this as well is that there is a distinction between strong ancestors and weak ancestors. Not that they're weak, but it's kind of like you have strong ancestors that are ready to support you on your path, and you have ancestors that actually need your support. That's kind of the difference. So the strong ancestors can also attach themselves to your staff to work with you. And it is also, the staff is like a symbol, or it connects you to your own spine. And in Sittan, and this is also similar then to how I learned Seiðr, for example, is that energy travels through your spine basically all of the time. So that doesn't stop or anything. And when you go on a trance journey, because we do trance journeys with the staff, so that's basically going into a deeper layer of consciousness to receive messages, or to interpret things. You travel through the staff. So the staff is at that point, it is of course the staff, it is your anchor, but it is also the spine you consciously travel through, and it is also the world tree. So in Sittan we call the world tree the 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔬𝔢𝔑. The axis mundi, like the big world tree connecting the planets and the upper worlds to the worlds here, but also the underworlds. So it is, it holds many things. It looks very simple, but it is a very powerful tool.
That's the thing that we talked about, that I gathered my wand in a similar way to how you described you could maybe get a staff. I just journeyed into the woods of my village and was like, I would like a wand, please. And then I'm just going to go wherever my instinct leads me. And then I found a grove that I never really had been before. And then I just saw this like stick on the ground and was like, that's the one.
That's it, yeah.
My family, like as I said, we don't really have staffs here, although your grandfather, I believe, is your maternal grandfather who came from my area.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
maybe that's just the thing that isn't like very well known about, at least not in my family. Most of my family isn't from here. We are from Silesia, and we came here after the expulsion. So my actual family that is native to here is like a very small part. Well, that might also be another reason for why I don't immediately recognize some of the traditions that you have in the Sittan tradition. I'm curious about, I think we already talked about this as well, of like local influences in our practice, in our magic, and especially with the fact that the Low Saxon language extends also into the Eastern Netherlands. So there's a lot of similar terminology, especially when it comes to magic. And when I heard that your tradition was called the Sittan tradition, I also immediately recalled one of my other great grandparents who actually was like more from here, being like, oh, ik ga buiten zitten. And that means like, oh, I'm sitting outside today. I'm just sitting in front of the porch and just like being there. And the way it was described to me, because I wasn't really around for that, but the way it was described to me by people who witnessed that is that it was a very meditative thing. And that's already a very like funny, perhaps not connected, but perhaps connected thing that I recognized in your Sittan tradition.
Yeah, I do think so, actually. I do think it might be related, because Sittan is also, my husband always jokes about this. When I mentioned Sittan or I try to explain something to him, and he's also part of our training, but then it isn't his family tradition. So when I say Sittan, he can resist to say sometimes like, yeah, go sit. And in Dutch it's zitten, it's almost the same word. So, but that's also what it is and what it means. It means going out. Of course, you can also do this in your home, but basically going out into nature and sitting and listening and being there with your staff. But you can also do it without, and really observing. Basically, for example, observing geese or other birds and what they are doing, but also observing the wind and observing sounds. And that is a really big part of the tradition. So, which also makes you very aware of your surroundings. And that is basically, the basics, I think, of Sittan. So I do think there might be a connection there. Yeah.
Sittan seems like a very Eastern Netherlands, Northwestern Germany kind of thing. Are there any like differences or equivalents in the Western Netherlands to your tradition? Is it the same or different? Is the terminology different? Do you know anything about that?
Actually, not so much, and that's because I've actually always had this really strong focus and feeling with the area that I'm from, and that my ancestors are also from on my mother's side, because my father's side does come from the west of the Netherlands mostly. But yeah, what I notice there is that there doesn't seem to be, or at least I don't know about that, there doesn't seem to be a solid tradition present, so to say. And there might be, of course, and I do think that they are there, but maybe not, they're not being made known to the outside world. So I don't know much about the practices in the West. What I do know is that, that there is a very strong focus, which I actually think is a bit sad, on traditions that are not from here at all. And of course, it's fine by me if you do that with a good teacher and with respect that you can learn from another tradition. But when it is something that is so completely different from where you are from and where you are rooted, I think you might also lose things or not even be aware of them in your own surroundings. And I think that's kind of a problem actually in the Netherlands as a whole, basically, but that a lot of people are not seem to be not aware or attuned in some way to their own surroundings, and that there is actually a very rich folklore here, and that there is even in a lot of our children's songs there is a lot of magic in there, and children still learn that. So I think that's actually quite a big issue. And if you ask people from the west of the Netherlands, like, okay, so basically the question you asked me, like, what kind of practices are there? 9 times out of 10, they say something like, yeah, but that's all gone now. We don't have that anymore. It's gone. And then I'm like, this can't be possible. There has to be something. So that is kind of what I notice. And what I notice about the difference with me living in the northeast, basically, of the Netherlands is that and also further up north, is that people, it's quite weird. People tend to be more introverted. They keep more to themselves here. But if you do ask them about something, or if you just walk around in small villages here, you will actually see quite a lot of things that point into the direction of a form of folk magic. Even if it's really small. So I do think it's more alive here, maybe. But yeah, I think that's the biggest difference, that people in the West often feel like they don't have anything, but I think they do. Yeah.
That's also something that I talked about with another Dutch folk magic practitioner who I had here on the channel, and she's actually from the West, and she told me that, like, in the Western Netherlands, people have a lot of prejudice against people from the Eastern Netherlands, because especially people like from Twente or something, because they are viewed as like the stupid country folk. That was very familiar to me, because in Germany, people from Central and Southern Germany often view the North as like very backwards and country folk. And I think it's very interesting that this area is kind of looked down upon as like backwards, but we still have some more preservation of like folk magical practices, at least more present.
Yeah.
And these are just some interesting commonalities between Germany and the Netherlands that I pick up from time to time. And then I think, well, we are actually not that different, I think.
No, I don't think so either.
Something that I saw you write about on your website, but I want to ask you here as well, is what are the sources and resources you draw on to inform your practice? Like maybe historical sources, any documents, or even UPG and things that you find in your own personal path. Like, could you talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, it's a mix of different things. So what I mentioned before, I draw a lot, of course, from the training I've had as well, because that has been my foundation to come back to Sittan, kind of the way that I work now as well. But the most important part of my practice, that informs my practice, so to say, is the oral tradition. And then I posted a reel about this recently as well. And then I noticed that it is actually not so common, I think, for people to see an oral tradition, how to say that, that an oral tradition also includes spirit contact, contact with your ancestors mainly, and that is actually the most important way of learning for me. And it's not like one day I thought, okay, I'm going to ask my ancestors this and this, and whatever answer comes, that's it. I do have a very structured way of working with that, and also with trying to focus on, okay, what are they trying to tell me, and also repeating stuff. So usually, sometimes it's very clear, but what you have to be really aware of, I think, is if you learn this way, so a spirit taught, that in Dutch we call this ruis, like there can be, when you try to get an answer, something else can come and cut through that. So you have to be very focused, and also you have to ask very clear questions, because otherwise you can get a really different kind of experience that has nothing to do with what you're trying to discover. So that is the most important part. And that is also, to me, a very important part of teaching Sittan, of actually bringing back that awareness that we can actually communicate with our ancestors, and that they do have clear answers and how to interpret that. And that you can also trust on that, or learn how to trust on that, because for a lot of people, that is quite hard, actually. So next to that, I do work with written sources. For example, with folk magical sources, we don't really have books like folk almanacs or anything. We don't really have that here in the Netherlands, but we do have archives, and you can actually find a lot about folk magical practices in there. And I also read a lot of books also about other practices, because I have found that sometimes there's, I think, for example, okay, for this kind of practice or this kind of situation, there has to be some kind of ritual, or there has to be something that my ancestors did, and I'm not quite sure. And then I'm going to read or try to find something. And then when I feel, okay, this is something, there might be something in there, then I think about it or write it down. And then I go into a trance again, and I basically tell my ancestors, well, I'm trying to find the missing puzzle piece for this kind of issue. Can you please show me what you did when someone came to you with this or this or this question, or when you wanted to do a ritual like this or this? And then that usually takes some time, and sometimes there's nothing. It's just completely different, but often something comes up, and then I can kind of translate that and try to integrate that again into the tradition. So it's basically a mix of all kinds of sources.
When things come up in your trance work, is it more like a vision that you have within the trance, or is it something more in the lines of you ask the question in the trance, then you go out of the trance, and days later something might randomly pop up in your life that gives you a hint?
Actually, both can happen. What I also have quite a lot is that I don't really get anything during the trance, but I do feel the contact with my ancestors, and then I just thank them, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I will try again tomorrow. But then I go to sleep, and then I dream about something. So that's also what happens a lot. And it really depends on the kind of question basically that I have. Sometimes I don't even have to ask the question, and then it's like in my face, and then it's quite a clear image. But that doesn't happen always. It really has to do with the question, but also with which ancestor is answering, basically. Yeah.
I've also seen that you often do like these trance rituals around like I don't know what to call them in English, like these grave mounds from
Yeah,
these grave mounds.
burial mounds. Yeah.
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 When you do trance work alone or in groups around these sites,
Mm.
how do you avoid it getting awkward with random people who walk by and stuff? Doesn't that like disturb the trance or something?
Yeah, it does. I think you can't really avoid that. When we do that, I always tell the people who are with me, like, okay, just be aware, be prepared that the Netherlands is a very small country. So be prepared, people will come. And some people will come up to us and ask us questions. And that has happened quite a lot. And sometimes that's nice because they are genuinely interested and they feel something. And sometimes it's not so nice because they can be really rude, like, "Oh, what are you doing? You have to explain it to me." um, yeah, that's kind of I think it's part of being a folk magical practitioner in the Netherlands. If you go outside, you will meet other people, and some of them will be friendly and some of them not. So it can become awkward, but I've noticed that if I prepare the students, that they are okay with it, and I always do the lesson about the sitting out. So at the burial mounds, I always do it at the end of a training so that they have their own foundation and they feel secure in their practice, and then usually it's fine. So, yeah,
Yeah.
but it is awkward still.
Yeah. That's the thing
Yeah.
that deters me kind of from doing more rituals and stuff outside because I'm generally a very awkward person, and then when someone comes up to me, I'm like, I can't explain this right now. Like, please just leave me alone. That would
Yeah.
be me in this situation. I don't think that I have like the well, calm and centeredness of you and your group, but maybe I'll try someday because my region also has a lot of these like sites. We call them 𝔖𝔭𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔫, which is like the sleeping stones because there's a lot of folklore of sleeping giants or sleeping spirits who are underneath them, which is already kind of like witchy and spiritual.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, maybe I'll check that out and try to like overcome my own awkwardness in that. Um, Another question that I have for you, since the Sittan tradition derives itself from Eastern Netherlands and Northwestern Germany, like two distinct countries who historically don't have the best relations. Um, does it ever like deter you in a research or get awkward when you draw from German sources and some Dutch people come up to you and say like, "What is this German shit?" or something like that?
um for me, it's actually, I think that's really personal. It's yeah, sometimes I feel it can be kind of closed off in a way. I don't really know if I can really explain that, but it sometimes it can appear to me that the German part, so to say, of the tradition is kind of not always that accessible to me. And it basically has to do with, yeah, with energy, and it doesn't directly have to do with the history, but that there is some kind of, yeah, it's kind of blocked, but then again sometimes it's not. And I do know these reactions from some Dutch people, like, oh, you can't possibly do or be focused on anything German. And my reply usually to that is that also very personal, but that's my grandmother, who's still alive, who is the daughter of my great grandfather. She's German, and she is the sweetest woman I know, and she's very loving, very caring, and that is for me the most important connection to Germany, actually. So for me, it has actually a very personal and positive feeling in that sense. And of course, I am aware of the history, but I have always been, yeah, focused more on the positive side, and also, that line of my grandmother, so to say, that is the Sittan line. That is where Sittan comes from, and when I'm working with that, I've always experienced also with her father, so with my great grandfather when he was still alive, that there was so much love in that line also for us. And yeah, that is what I feel. So when people say something like that, yeah, but my experience is this and this and this, and I understand your reaction, but there's more. There's always more. No, it's not black and white. So.
Something that I also like want to know as someone who looks into German folk magic, when you find German sources, do you like have problems when they're like written in either High German or Low Saxon? And does it make your research harder, or have you found ways to work around that?
Actually, the Low Saxon sources I find not so hard because to read at least, because it is actually quite similar to Dutch.
Yeah.
So they are really accessible for me. I understand most of it when I see it written. And High German and Old High German is a bit harder for me. But yeah, my mother was born in Germany as well, and she is fluent in German, and so is my father actually. So when I really, really struggle with something, I can always ask them, like, what does this mean? But sometimes they don't know either because it's very, yeah, magical, so to say, and they don't know a word or they don't know what it could mean. So that can be a struggle, yeah.
With knowing Low Saxon, Dutch sources are also more accessible to me. So
Yeah.
when I look through them, I'm like, oh yeah, this is very similar to that. And we also pronounce a lot of things in the same way because my dialect of Low Saxon is very close to the Dutch border. So I think this is like a cross-country thing with Low Saxon, like as a bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what did you want to say?
Oh yeah. What did I want to say? Oh yeah. Yeah, I wanted to say that I mentioned before that actually in the Netherlands we seem to not have written sources anymore. Like in Sweden they call them the black books, I think, like magical books with spells. We don't really seem to have that anymore, even though it should have been there. So that's sometimes hard in the Netherlands, but I do know that in Germany they have sources like that. And I kind of noticed that it's because I don't really always know the German terminology for things, that it's not that accessible to me to find those kind of sources. So I think that kind of was the thing that I mentioned before, that I meant with that sometimes I feel like my access is kind of blocked to the German part of the practice, because that's hard if you don't really know the correct terminology. You don't really know where to look. Yeah.
That's something that I also struggle with as a German speaker, because a lot of the terminology is like very loose, let's say. For example, we have the old term Brand, which means burn. And in folk magical grimoires in Germany, Brand is used to describe anything from like inflammation to like an actual burn on your skin to a fever and stuff. And
Yeah.
things like that make it like more complicated to research, and especially when they are written in a very hard to read font.
Well, yes.
And
So yeah.
now I'm also curious, because this is also a question that I frequently ask people who come on my channel, is what is your favorite aspect of your practice?
Wow, that's a hard question. Favorite part, I think, yeah, both the connection to nature, actually, to the landscape and the energies and the spirits that are there, and also that ancestral connection. Of course, I've talked about it a lot right now, but yeah, the ancestors are really, they are so important in the Sittan tradition. And yeah, that's my favorite part, working with the positive things there in the ancestral field, but also with the challenging things, because I feel that it really, yeah, it helps you to move forward as a person as well. Yeah.
Now, I think we are almost finished. a question that I have that some people who watch this video might also have is, if you're curious about the Sittan tradition or generally folk magic from the Eastern Netherlands or Northwestern German folk magic, what would you tell those people? What are some resources? What route can they go down to get more information on that?
Yeah. So my first thought was, yeah, I don't have a book yet because people often ask me, when are you going to write a book? But I don't have the time right now, but I want to, because I think it's time actually to share more information about this type of folk magic. But yeah, where to look? I think I would actually always recommend to look very locally. So even if you're not from this area, to first look at your own area, actually, because that's where it starts. But if you really want to specifically learn about that part of the world, so to say, yeah, I would. It's maybe a bit lame, but I would read on my page or on my Instagram, because I'm currently the only person actually sharing about this tradition. So there might be a way in there for you. And I also really believe that's how it works. That if you know where your path leads you, where your ancestors lead you, you will get there by reading or seeing stuff that other people are doing. So, for example, when I found your channel for the first time, I thought, wait a second, that's really something is happening, you know, and you also you kind of feel that in your body. You feel that there's a connection there, like an ancestral connection, and that also leads to new information. So I would actually recommend to look for people who are already doing things, and just listen to what they're saying or read what they're writing and see what happens with you. Because I don't really believe that you really learn when you only read something and like in a theoretical way. I do think written sources are very important, but the actual learning comes when you are aware of what happens inside of you when you take in new information. So that's kind of really focus on what happens inside of you. That makes sense. Yeah.
That's a really amazing way to put things. Before I ask you the last question, this is not on the interview outline, but I'm very curious. I already talked with you about like Northwestern German folk magic, or generally Northern German folk magic, being called 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔐, and what that entails, kind of like seeing soothsaying and stuff. Is there any like equivalent to that in the Eastern Netherlands? Like, have you heard the term 𝔭𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔐 before, or any practice that sounds similar?
Not necessarily in the word, but it could basically be a Dutch word, because we would say 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔐. It's basically the same. But what really stood out to me when I found your page is that it immediately reminded me of a ritual. And I think I asked you about this, and that is the Voorloop. And it kind of, if you translate it literally to English, it would mean walking in front. Where you go out and you literally walk, and you again try to be as aware as possible of your surroundings, of sounds, of basically anything that occurs. And then you can go into a trance state as well, and it can happen that you kind of see something that's going to happen in the near future. And that's also a ritual that was always told about in my family, that my great grandfather did and that his father did. So that was kind of, that immediately came back to me in that way. Yeah.
I think it's important that like Dutch practitioners and German practitioners, especially from across the border regions, kind of get together more and are connected more, and aren't intimidated by like the border in between our countries, because I think we could gain so much knowledge and so much wisdom from like communicating more with each other and being more connected to each other. And I know that there are animosities with basically every country that Germany borders, which oftentimes I have to say well-placed animosity, but I do think that connecting more with each other, especially in traditions which are so similar, can lead to like really amazing results.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I also think that, and I also think it's always important to remember that, you know, how how gruesome that part of history was that you're speaking of, like the Second World War. There is also a really long history before that, and I always say to my students as well that land borders are actually very young, and it was very common, especially between what's now the border then of the Netherlands and Germany, to actually work in the other country, or to have family there and to have mixed families like I come from basically, and also a similar language which you still speak. So it's still very present, and that border that isn't even there physically, basically, it can kind of block your way, I think, of what you just mentioned, of really deepening practice and being in contact with each other. And I also think that's really important. Yeah.
This I'm just stretching the interview, I know, but I just had another question that isn't on the outline that I want to ask. The Low Saxon language, because it's so prevalent in this area that we draw our practice from, does it play a role in your personal practice as well for magical terminology, or do you mostly do everything in Dutch?
I do most of it in Dutch, and I actually would love to know more Low Saxon, and also more German in general. But I think I kind of mentioned that before, like sometimes it can feel like a block because I don't really know where to start or where to look. But I found a small fragment of a video of my great grandparents, actually from Germany, where he's also my 𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔨 is also showing his stuff, and I was listening to him very closely, and then I noticed that he's actually not speaking normal German, and I'm not sure if it was Low Saxon, but it was Plat, for sure. So I would love to know more about that, but it's not really in that way a part of my practice at the moment. But it is something that I kind of feel like, I want to dive into that more.
Now we come to my last question that I have on the outline, which is, are there any interesting tidbits of your practice that you want to share, like anecdotes or even some small spells or rituals or some folklore that's really personal to you or anything like that?
Okay. Yeah, I actually come to Frau Holle then, because Frau Holle is very important also in this practice, and we don't necessarily work a lot with gods or deities, or so to say. It is possible though if you have that connection, but Frau Holle is really, we kind of in Sittan we view her as the big spirit, basically the big great foremother of the tradition as well. And she's also connected to the Witte Wieven. Does that ring a bell with you, maybe?
Yeah, I think in Germany, well, in this area of Germany, we call them something similar, like also Wittenwieven or something like that. Like in standard German it would be Weiße Frauen, but that's more common in the south.
Yeah, yeah, and what I want to share about that is that that is something that is still very much alive as well, even among people who don't really view themselves as practitioners of folk magic or something similar. Is that when there is mist over the countryside, and we have that a lot in this time of the year, that it's really, really foggy. But you also see like, what's the English word? Navel in Dutch. This moving mist, so that you see that kind of in a shape, like like a moving shape. And then we have that a lot right now in the morning. And people often say when they see that, they say it's the 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔐 going over the land. And yeah, that is also a really good start point, actually, if you want to learn about folk magical practices from this region, is again observe the country. And Frau Holle is important because she is seen as the big witwief. Um, and wit, it means the color white, but actually the original meaning is like cunning woman. That's how you would translate it. And then again, you see the word witch in that as well. Like Wicca is also one of the older Germanic words for witch. So that's kind of also another core of the practice of folk magical practices here. And Frau Holle is still very much alive in that sense, but also in lots of songs. And there are also children's songs, like there's a song about Frau Holle herself, but also 𝔬𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔯 𝔬𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔯, you would say in English, black swans and white swans. And it is a ritual. And it is also connected to Frau Holle again, because she has an underworld connection. But if you sing this song, you actually notice that there's a deeper layer, and it is about the swans taking people to the underworld. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I did not realize that the Netherlands had like so much Frau Holle folklore. I always associate her with like central Germany, because in my region there isn't really any like Frau Holle folklore. There is folklore of Frau Holle like figures, kind of like the 𝔖𝔬𝔬𝔢𝔬𝔢𝔬𝔬 that you just explained, but not like Frau Holle stated explicitly.
Yeah.
And I also know that this like swans taking like spirits to Frau Holle, this mythology also exists over here.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I wanted to note is that this Wicca or Wicken that you said is still Wicken is still a term here in Low Saxon that's used to describe magical practitioners and to describe people who do divination. So again, lots of connections and a lot of aha moments for me, I think.
Yeah, and that's why it is important, I think, to connect more.
So is there anything, now that we are through with the outline, is there anything that you want to say, that you want to let the people know, that you want to promote, anything like that?
Oh, I'm not good at promoting. What I want to say, yeah, I think, yeah, the most important piece of advice, so to say, is if you want to start out with, basically getting closer to either your ancestors or the area where you are living, it's really important to trust your own instincts and to trust your experiences and to not listen to other people so much, especially when it comes down to what I often notice is that someone is really new to kind of practice and they feel, of course, unsure about things that they are seeing, for example, in a trance, or if they are being visited by a spirit, if that is correct. And it is good to talk about that with other people, but please be aware that what you usually feel is right, or what you think is right, that's usually the thing that you have to trust in. So if people say to you, no, you can't experience that, or no, that's not even real, please don't listen to that. That's my piece of advice. Listen to yourself. Yeah.
So again, thank you for your time, for coming on here. It's been a pleasure and I've learned so much. And everyone who's watching right now, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨.